Welcome back. I'm Bill. Today I have with me a Coleman Model 335 lantern. This is a 300 candle power single mantle lantern. They were only made by the Canadian Coleman company at their Toronto factory, so you don't see them in the States very often. And some people may say, wait a minute, 335s are green. And yes, the vast majority of them are green, but the first year they were sometimes made in red. June 1970 was when it was first introduced, and most of them seem to be red. That was the case through the summer of 1970. They continued to make red ones until the summer of 1971, and after that they're all green. But they also made green ones from the very beginning, and it is an absolute mystery in the collector community why they would make them in two different colors. They seem to be testing the market, and by the middle of 1971 had figured out to go with green. But it makes sense that they would make them in red. This was a replacement for the Model 200A. In the US, Coleman would continue to make the 200A until 1983. But in Canada, they discontinued that in June of 1970 and immediately started producing 335s. Functionally, they're the same lantern. The founts are the same capacity. The valves are virtually identical. I mean, they're machined a bit differently, but they're functionally the same. The main difference, and you can tell this if you look at the patent on these, is Coleman was looking for a cheaper way to produce a lantern. And they significantly reduced the number of parts and the complexity of the assembly. Instead of having a complicated burner cage with air tubes and burner caps and all of that were all these separate parts that you had to assemble. The burner and the cage on this is three stamped pieces of steel. You've got the base here, and then the burner tube and the manifold is two stamped pieces that are crimped together, which greatly reduced the cost of manufacturing, and then they designed a new style of vent to go along with it. But of course the 200As, those were red. The 220Es that had been made up to that point were red. And then in 1970 they started transitioning to green. The 220F was made in green as well. So why two colors? I don't know. I don't think anyone does. But anyhow, yeah, functionally equivalent to the 200A. A lot of similarities, a lot of differences though. This is again a very early production one from the third month they were made. It has a few quirks here and there, like for example the collar on this, you might be able to see it's got a lot of rust on it. That's because it's steel and it's nickel plated. Nickel plating isn't great. But some of the early ones had steel collars. Most of the 335s would have brushed aluminum collars. This has a steel fount. Sometimes you may find nickel-plated founts under the paint. The 335 or the 339 was the kerosene version, and in terms of appearance, the primary difference was that the 339s had a nickel-plated fount, and sometimes you find those founts under the paint on the 335s, but this just appears to be plain steel. Not a whole lot else to the history. They made 335s in green, not red of course, until 1983. And in 1973 they introduced the 321 series, which would go through a number of variations. And they made those until I think 1984. And then it morphed into the 325, which the Toronto factory made until it closed in about 1989. The 321 and 325 were the Easy Light version of the 335. The fount, the vent, the burner cage, and the manifold and air tubes and all of that, even the generator, were basically the same on the 321s. They just had a different style valve that used O-rings and was supposedly easier to light. So yeah, they made these until 1983. They discontinued the 335 the same time the Wichita factory discontinued the single mantle 200A. So this is basically the Canadian counterpart of the 200A. I was really excited to find a red one just an hour away here on Vancouver Island. I'm not sure I would call red 335s rare, but they're definitely in the hard to very hard to find category in my experience. I've been collecting lanterns for roughly 15 years, and this was the first that I've actually seen locally and in the wild. Every once in a while I would see one over on the Lower Mainland or something on Facebook Marketplace, but this is the first I've encountered on the island in the wild or in a thrift shop, antique shop, or anything. So they're not rare, but they're hard to find. So I was pretty excited to find this. So we're going to clean this up. The steel burner assembly is pretty rusty, so I'm going to put that in the electrolysis tank. And the paint on this is really bad. As you can see, it flakes off very easily, and it has some bad staining on it that doesn't want to come off. I've tweaked with it a little bit, and so I'm going to strip this and repaint it. I think everything else on it should be good. The one thing I'm probably going to replace is the pump cap, because this one, the nickel, is almost completely gone, and it's not just rusty, it's just really, really awful. I don't really know the history on it. Someone found it at a garage sale and then put it on Marketplace, and he didn't know anything about it. So anyhow, early 335. So let me get you moved around and we'll start tearing into it. All right, 335s, pretty quick and easy disassembly. Just take the spring-loaded bail off, take the vent off, the globe. I was pretty excited about this globe. This is the original globe that came on it, the Colex made in England globe. Those are pretty difficult to find. Just get rid of this mantle here. It did come with this mantle on it, and I have verified this thing runs. It doesn't run great, so I think it needs a little work. But you can see the design on this, the new burner assembly. Again, this is stamped, and these two halves are stamped. They're pressed together, and then there's a burner tube and a cap that are just stuck in there. Like a 200. The uppers are just held on with one nut. All of this nut and this whole burner frame were originally nickel plated. I don't know how much is left on there. This looks like it might be okay. Everything up here is burned off, and I'll see about getting this burner cap off, but I have a suspicion it's probably not going to want to come out. These actually unscrew pretty easily, but they're on a burner tube that fits up in here, and this little screw with the Robertson head on it locks it in place. This is rusty enough that I bet it's going to be stuck, and trying to get it out may just cause more damage, and you munge the threads or get it out of round, and it's hard to get back on. So if you're working on one of these and you can't get the burner cap off or the burner tube out, just leave it. It'll be okay. So I've got well, let me get the generator off first. Go ahead and turn the cleaning tip up. I can disconnect it more easily. There's our jam nut, and this generator, that's pretty clean. That tells me this hasn't seen a whole lot of use. These 335s are great runners. It took me a while to warm up to them. I always thought they were kind of ugly, and I wasn't actually going to get into collecting them, and then they kind of grew on me. So this valve is sitting really low. Normally it's pretty easy to pull this out, but because this is sitting so low, it won't go underneath the valve. So I'm just going to have to pull this up like that, which I don't like doing because it deforms the collar a little bit, although not too bad. Again, this is nickel plated steel, so it's got some rust, but I think it should clean up pretty well. Take our valve wheel off. Like I said, this valve assembly is basically the same as on a 200. I don't know if they're interchangeable or not, but probably not, but it wouldn't surprise me if they were. something grinding in there, which is odd. Out. Okay, so we've got a little, there's a stop here, and we've got a ring, and the beveled side of this goes against this wire stop. And then the graphite packing slips on here, and then the nut goes on over the top, and then it's compressed down. So the graphite packing is stuck inside of this jam nut, and ideally it won't come out without ruining it, but there's nothing wrong with it, so I'm going to leave it in there. I'm not going to replace it, but I'm going to put these parts in citric acid later, and I don't want that graphite packing in the citric acid. Brief exposure won't hurt it, but soaking it and boiling it in there for a while will. Now, let's get our fuel cap off. These gaskets on the one-piece caps are a bear to replace, thankfully. This one, it's getting kind of hard, but it still seals without a problem, so I'm going to leave it. And we'll get this little clip off. There we go. This little clip's pretty rusty too, but it should clean up all right. But you can see just how this thing is just pitted, and it's terrible. So, and so the leather's in nice shape. So let's pop this guy off. I might need a smaller screwdriver to get in there. Yeah, let me get a smaller screwdriver. Okay. Need to get something into these little openings and then just pry. Might have to go from underneath here on the start. But once you get one side off, I'll find that later. Okay, so there's our pump cup. Again, it's in good shape, and I forgot, I think these things are pressed on, so I might end up having to replace this whole pump assembly if I want to replace this cap. I kind of forgot about that. I don't think these actually come off, but let's see. There we go. Whoops. I just threw the spring. Okay. So this guy's just press fit on, so you can wiggle it off, and it looks like it should press back on and stay with no problem. So that's good. So I'll just dig out a new cap from my boneyard, and all of that's good. We'll take out our air stem. Easiest way to do that is just with the pump handle. Stem. And I know the check valve works, but I like to clean it anyways because that's me. Don't take the check valve out unless you've got a check valve tool. The chances of damaging it are just not worth it unless it doesn't work. But then I'd recommend get a check valve tool to take it out anyways. It's got a slot. The tool has these little ears. They go in the slot. If you try to use a screwdriver or something screwdriver-like, they work until they don't, and you don't want to have it happen, or you don't want it to not work because you'll strip it out. I actually damaged a whole fount that way. But if you got the right tool, it's that easy. Shake it. You can hear a little ball rattling. That means it's usually going to be good. Now, we need to take the valve out of the fount. The easiest way to do this is to stick it upside, whoop, there's some gas in there still. The easiest way to do that is to stick it upside down in a vise and twist it out. You could try putting some pliers on there, but I can tell this has some sealant on there I've never seen before. This is an early model. They were probably doing different things. So I don't want to slip and have this torque and mess up these threads. So I'm actually going to go off camera and stick this in a vise, which I can't get to with the camera right now, and I'll be right back. Okay. Now, like a 200, the tip cleaner isn't really serviceable. You can't really take it apart. See the eccentric block goes up and down there. The graphite packing for this is inside here, and you can't pull this out without destroying the packing, because at the eccentric block end of this, it has a little twist in it. So if you try to pull that through, you'll tear the packing apart. And as far as I know, they don't make a replacement packing for this. You just have to buy a whole new tip cleaner assembly. The only thing that's left on here is to take apart our fuel and air tube. And this is definitely a Canadian model. It's just got a round top, so there's no way to put a wrench on it. And so fuel and air tube, there's our air wire, the lifter spring, and that's it. And that's our valve. That's as far apart as we're going to take it. Unless, of course, you need to replace the tip cleaner assembly. Then you'll need to have a replacement tip cleaner assembly. So that's it. Let's take some of these parts into the house and clean them up with some Simple Green. And then the fount, keep dumping a little bit of gas everywhere. The fount and the burner cage assembly. Actually, let me go grab a Robertson head driver. I didn't grab one before. Let me grab one and just see if that tube will come out. Okay. These screws don't usually shear off. That's at least one thing. But I'm going to get lucky here. I mean, this is good because then I can get a brush up inside and make sure that everything's clear. But get that out of the way. I think it's still working its way out there. I expect we'll have to lubricate it to get it back in. It's stuck right at that last little bit. Let's try. That tells you how. There we go. All right, now. The burner cap will, if you're tenacious enough, it will unscrew from this tube. I am not even going to attempt that on this. Maybe if I applied a lot of heat and did some heating and quenching, I could get that off. But these tubes are very thin and they will squash really easily. And I do not want to do that because you saw how difficult it was to get it out. Imagine how difficult it will be to get it back in there if it's out of round. So this is best just left the way it is. You can get everything clean. I can see through and see there are no cobwebs or bugs or anything like that in there, so that's good. And we can get a brush up both sides, and we can get a brush in here and a brush in here and make sure everything's clean. So this should all be good. So these two will go in the electrolysis tank eventually. Let's go ahead and take our vent and our globe inside and get them cleaned up with some Simple Green and water. And all these other parts will go into a citric acid bath. Just going to spray the globe and the vent with some Simple Green. Should take care of everything. Right, here we are in the kitchen. I've got brass in one pan and steel and nickel plated stuff in the other pan. In there with it is a citric acid solution. It's not exact, but I use about one tablespoon of citric acid powder per liter of water. That's nice and weak, so it doesn't do any damage. I'll let this simmer for probably about 30 minutes and take it out and rinse it with cool water and rub it down with steel wool. And no, this lantern does not have two collars. I had to throw another collar in there that's from another project. So, see you in a bit. So I've got my little 5-gallon electrolysis tank set up. This is a pretty simple setup. It's cheap. I've got a battery charger that cost me about $5 at a thrift store. I've got a 5-gallon bucket. I bought a piece of steel flat bar and cut it into 4 segments and bolted it to the sides of the bucket. I've got some wire connecting all those bolts, and all you have to do is submerge your piece in there. You can see the 335 burner frame here, the bottom of it. I've also got some 220 parts in here for a project I'm working on. You make sure they're all wired up and in contact with each other. I've got the wire here. You put your positive lead on here and your negative on the anode, and the rest just transfers to the anode. It takes a bit. I'll probably leave this stuff in here overnight. It's just gone in, so the water is pretty clear. After a few hours, it'll be foamy and murky, but that's what you want. It's a pretty good setup. The anodes can be easily brushed off because they'll get rust and crud on them, and then the connection, if you will, through the solution isn't as strong, but they're really easy to clean up once they dry out. The solution is just hot water with about a 1/2 to 3/4 cup of baking soda or washing soda in it. You can use baking soda or salt, but washing soda seems to work best. So I will leave this in here overnight and we'll check on it in the morning and see what things look like. Okay, our parts are coming out of the citric acid bath, so I'm just going to rinse them with water, and I'm going to use some 4/0 steel wool. Sorry, this is getting a little ratty, but this is the second project of the day for it. And to get things looking pretty good, sometimes I'll put them on the polishing wheel after this, although that's a little shinier than they would have come from the factory. But if I want things looking really nice, that's the next step. Let's polish things up. I'm using a medium firm buffing wheel and some white polishing compound. fount is out of the electrolysis tank. It's looking pretty good. For the most part, the paint came off as I was lifting it out of the water in the tank. There were a few little spots that I had to hit with a brass brush while I was rinsing it off, but you can see it's all gone. It's difficult to get on camera. I did use a wire wheel around the rim on the bottom because it is kind of rough. There's a little bit of surface rust in here. I wanted to clean that up. But the next step is to prep it for priming, and I've already rinsed it, and while I was doing that, I rubbed it down with 4/0 steel wool, but I'm going to rough it up just a little bit while also smoothing out anything, like I can feel there's some little scratches or dings or something here. I'll smooth that stuff out with some 150 grit, and that will also give the primer something to grab hold of. Right, just run my hands around it, feel for any little burrs or if there's any paint left on there. There's a little, I feel there's something here. Oh, that's smooth. Still feel a little bit there, but I think that'll be filled in with the primer, and then we'll sand the primer. You can tell these are some of these rough areas or spots that were already exposed where the paint had come off. There's a little spot here that had rusted slightly. So anyhow, so that's feeling good. So I will now wipe it down with some acetone just to make sure it's clean, and to remove any grease that might be on it, and then we'll be ready to prime. All right, it's time to primer. Just using this simple trim-clad gray primer. It works great, and you'll see I've got two founts here, so you may see this footage in two different videos because I've got two separate projects going on here, both of them getting red paint, so I'm doing them at the same time. So I'm going to do 2 light coats and 1 thicker coat with 5 to 10 minutes in between. Okay, so the primer is cured. It's time to wet sand this. I use what I've got, anywhere between 600 and 1000 grit. Obviously the higher grit, the more aggressive you can be. I also like this trim-clad primer because it goes on more smoothly. A lot of times I use Rust-Oleum. It's good too, but it almost goes on with like a dusty feel, and it does take some wet sanding to get it really nice and smooth. But sanding at this point between the primer and the color coat is the difference between an okay paint job or even a good paint job and a really nice one. So I'm using some 1000 grit, get it wet, and just start working my way around. Again, with this trim clad, it doesn't take a whole lot, but basically just want to make sure I sand everything I'm going to run my finger around, especially when it's wet. You can feel if it drags at all, or if there are any burrs, or if there's any sort of that grit on the surface. You'll feel that go away. So I can feel this actually feels pretty good, but it's not nearly as smooth as where I've sanded. If you sand through in a few little spots here and there, that's not a big deal. Like I said, it doesn't take much. This, I didn't have to do much very aggressive sanding, so it's not covered in sort of that's water suspended paint dust. So all I really need to do is just wipe it down with a clean cloth and make sure it's dry. Okay, there we go. I just want to let that dry for, say, 30 minutes or so before I spray the paint on it, because that primer will absorb a little bit of moisture, I think. Sometimes if you spray it too quickly, it'll blister up. So we're ready for our color coat now. And then there were 3. The number's growing. Actually, I've got 3 of these that all need to be painted red, so I'm doing them all at the same time, so you'll again probably see this footage in more than one video if you're paying attention. I'm using this Trim Clad Fire Red. I really like it to duplicate Coleman Canada's red on the 220s and 335s and the stove tanks and the 200s and all that. So I'll be spraying this 3 coats, 2 thin coats, 1 heavier coat, and that should be good. We are ready to put this back together. Paint job came out really nicely. I'm very happy with that. So we need to remember the clocking here. So the pump was on the right and the filler was on the left looking at the valve knob. And for whatever reason, they decided on these to put the decal on the back side. I don't know why that is. They didn't do this consistently, but I've got a replacement decal here. I think I got these from old Coleman parts. There are a couple people who sell them. And this matches the original one. It's got the little R for the registered trademark on it, and the white border. So while my hands are still clean, I'm going to put this on. And again, it goes on this side. This is the back. These are vinyl. The old one, in this case, is a foil decal. We've got a little air bubble there. Okay. Now we're ready to start putting this back together. So how about we start with the cap? That's easy. And I'll put the check valve back in. I think I'll do the pump last just because there's some oil involved with that, and I'd rather not have oily hands doing everything. Just feed that guy down in. Whoops. Tighten it up finger tight. And then valve done. Now our valve, it needs to have its air wire, and here somewhere we've got there's our spring and our fuel and air tube. So I'm going to go ahead and stretch the spring out a little bit, just to make sure it's lifting. It looks like it should be okay. The spring goes on the bottom underneath this shoulder, because you remember the valve stem is going to be pushing it down, and when the valve stem retracts, it needs to push, the spring needs to push it up. And that threads into the bottom here. There's no need for thread sealant on that connection. Make sure it's snug. And now, this is a brass on brass fitting. It's a tapered national pipe thread, so it should in theory seal if you get it tight enough. My observation with these is once you take them out, they may not seal as well as they did originally without overclocking it. And I kind of like things to line up properly. So what I use is some thread sealant. Doesn't take a lot, just a dab on either side, and that ensures that it's not going to leak. Coleman used some kind of thread sealant on theirs too. This is a sealant, not a thread locker. I used the Permatex blue. You could use the red, but the red is that's the permanent stuff. So, and that's where it wants to stop, which is interesting. Let me check and make sure I've got the clocking right. All right, I do have the clocking right. I have the decal on the wrong side. So I'm gonna just go ahead and snug that up. That's right. And I'm gonna have to peel this off. Thankfully it's vinyl, so I can get away with that. And we will transfer it to the other side. Get it crooked there. I actually double checked that clocking before I did it and I still got it backwards. So, okay, well at least we don't have an air bubble now. So, all right. While I've got the valve off, I might as well put the collar on, so it'll be a little bit easier. And let's see, we'll get our valve stem nut and our valve stem and our little brass ring. And I think that's all of that. So, let's see, this guy goes on, and if you look at it, one side is dished, the other side is flat. The dished side rides on this steel ring that's on here. It's just clipped on or bent on. Some of the old models, that was the only way to. Careful with this part that you don't ding your fresh paint with your crescent wrench. Probably have more clearance if I used a regular wrench instead of an adjustable one. Okay. I'm going to tighten it up until so what I want to do is make sure that this is good and tight, and then I'll back it off a little bit. And usually after it gets hot a couple of times, it'll loosen up. Sometimes you have to readjust that nut at that point. So there's our valve stem, and this valve is sitting so low that this collar really doesn't want to clear the bottom of that. So I think this is why we use thread sealant. Now I'm stuck on here, so should be able, can't pull on that part, but I think I'm just going to rely on thread sealant to seal this because the collar isn't going to sit underneath the nut. It barely cleared to begin with. I'm not sure why it's not clearing now. I'm trying to do this without damaging my paint job. That thread sealant's already getting rather tight. So let's see what we can do here. Somehow I've got to get this off. And I think the only way it's going to work is if I take this nut off. See, even when you've done this a zillion times and you know what you're doing, things don't always go according to plan. Expecting this to be a nice easy job, and so I'm going to go ahead and take this out, add some thread sealant to make sure that we're sealed good and tight. Thread sealant is, by the way, fuel proof. Okay, so we're backing it off one turn. So I don't know if someone's messed with this before. It certainly didn't look like it's ever been taken apart, but when it's like that, you kind of wonder. So That should give us clearance here, I think. It just barely clears the bottom of this nut. So that's actually, that has to be the position it was in to start with. So if you remember when I took this one apart, I went to put it in a vise to pull that valve out, and when I came back I said I probably could have taken it out with my hands if I just twisted it a little bit harder than I had. I don't know why it's like that, but it is. Too tight. That's good. Okay. So we've got just that little bit of clearance under the nut so the collar can clear here. What I'm talking about, so you can see, is this clearance underneath here. Put our knob on. There we go. Now for the generator, we'll put that on first, and then we'll put the rest together. We'll get our spring on here. Go ahead and put that, make sure the needle's straight, looks like it is, and go ahead and feed it through there. And then put it inside, put our nut on. Notice I don't have the tip on yet. Models like this, you can put the tip on later, and I like to do that just to make sure that everything is seating properly and that I'm not crushing the tip. 220 you can't do that, but these you can, and I like to take advantage of that. Jam that good and tight. And then we'll get our gas jet. Put that on. It's helpful to put it on with the needle up. And then I can see the needle sticking through. It's down, back up, down, so I know it's working and it's not being crushed in there. So now let's set this aside and put our burner frame together. That's pretty simple. We want to line up this hole with this hole. So we'll see how easily this goes in. That wasn't too bad. Went in easier than it came out. I'm sure it helps that I polished it. Get our little Robertson head screw in there. And that part's good to go. So back hole is for the generator, middle hole is for this stud here. When you're putting it on, make sure the generator feeds into that orifice. I'll get everything centered here. We'll put our nut on. The frame cleaned up better than I thought it might. It was very rusty. Okay. Don't like to over tighten that screw. It can pinch this in and mess up the paint job under the collar and all of that. So let's do our pump now. So we've got our air stem. Got a replacement cap because the old one came out looking like that. It was all rusty. Got our spring first, and our backing plate, which we'll just press on. It's easier to press it this way. Close those jaws up a bit more. Almost there. There we go. Actually, I could feel it kind of click into that seat. And our pump cup. And then our nifty little clip here. I'm going to make sure that everything's kind of flat. It looks like it's not misshapen, so I should be able to just press it on. And it should just click all around. Pull our leather back and make sure, yeah, that's not going to come off. So we'll just get our spring clip out and we'll oil this up. This leather is good, but it's dry. Oil over here. The easiest way to do this is to put the air stem in here and just let it drop down. Clean up any oil that has spilled. And tighten the air stem down so that it's straight. Make sure you got all the oil off your hands. And then get our holes lined up. And press it down. And it may, see if this will go in the hole. There we go. All right, we're good. Now, these take a number 99 mantle. That's what this is. I think this one's worthy of a, well, it's not an ancient silk light, but it is an older silk light. They don't make 99s anymore. I still find a fair bit around used, or buying a used lantern or something like that, or occasionally a thrift store will have one. So they're not too hard to find yet. But in a pinch, actually not in a pinch, if you don't have 99s, you can use Peerless 2CHG. No, sorry, that's for the double mantles. You can use a 24A. These are basically the same as a 99. 21s, which are the common ones Coleman still makes, they will work in a pinch, but I really don't recommend them. This guy is functionally equivalent to a Model 300. It's supposed to be a 300 candle power, and those 21 mantles are 250 candle power, or 200, something like that. Maybe together I think they're 250, but that's on the doubles. 21s tend to overburn on these, and they're not going to be as bright. So if you can get 99s, use 99s. If you can't get 99s, I would recommend using a Peerless 24A. 111s are too big for this, just in case you're wondering. Those are the big boys for the 500 candle power. '99s and 24As are pretty much the go-to for any of the small singles, like the 300 candle power ones. So there we go. Again, I'm really happy that this had the original globe. And we've got our vent, which cleaned up really nicely. It's just got the one little ding on it here. We'll put that guy on. There are two holes in that manifold. Just hold this on, and there we go. I think it turned out really nicely. Considering the rust on the collar and on the burner frame, I think that's really pretty good. So let me go off camera here for a minute, and when I'm back, this will be gassed up and pumped up, and we'll get that mantle burned in and lit. All right, we're gassed up. I've got about 30 strokes of the pump in there, so let's burn in our mantle. Put things back together here. We'll just give that a moment. All right, I think we're there. So I'm gonna crack the valve open and listen for a sputtering sound that tells me when fuel is getting to the generator. Sometimes it takes a while, sometimes it doesn't. So I hear a hiss. Okay, we're ready to light then. In fact, it may just light when I stick a match in there. Make sure we replace that pressure. And the lighting holes are in the back here, so I'm going to turn this toward you and operate the knob with my left hand. Listening for that sputter just helps us not waste matches. All right. I need to tighten this a little bit more. I've got a slight fuel drip there. Not too bad though. Let me take care of that quickly. Easier with the knob off. All right. You don't want to tighten it so much that it's hard to turn. And that seems to be dry. So I think we're good. So there we go. And that silk light, it burned in and is bright right away. So unlike some of the new ones, they take a while. Some of them just aren't that bright. So let me turn off the lights and see how it looks in the dark. All right, another 335 lives. Well, it lived already, but it looks a lot better than it did. And hopefully we'll have a lot more years left in it. These are great lanterns. They're workhorses. The green ones are everywhere here. I'm glad we finally found a red one. Again, this is the first one I found in the wild on the island here. Glad to have it. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time.